Was Julius Caesar destined to rule or to perish? How did a mere general dare to challenge Rome's most powerful men and establish himself as master of the world? Welcome to Sagicon, where history comes to life and where each video takes you into the destiny of those who shaped the world. Today, get ready to travel back in time and walk in Julius Caesar's footsteps. We will delve into one of the most extraordinary destinies in human history, that of a man who transformed a republic into an empire, crossed the Rubicon, and forever changed the face of Europe. From the bloody battlefields of Gaul to the steps of the Roman Senate, embark on a historical epic where glory, betrayal, military genius, and boundless ambition intertwine in a story more gripping than the boldest of fictions. But before setting off on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Thank you, and have a great trip. Rome, at the end of the 2nd century before Christ, was far more than a simple Italian city. It was already a power whose influence extended across the Mediterranean basin, fueled by successive military victories and the influx of wealth from Spain, Africa, or the East. Everywhere, new provinces joined the orbit of the Republic. Roman merchants traveled ever longer roads, while the legions, enjoying their prestige, relentlessly conquered new territories. At the heart of this expansion, the Eternal City was changing. Temples rose to honor the protective gods of Rome. New forms were built to host political debates, and the villas of great families spread across the surrounding hills. Yet this spectacular prosperity came with explosive contradictions. Military triumph brought gold to Rome, but it also widened wealth gaps. On one hand, certain patrician lineages became immeasurably richer and consolidated their client bases, while on the other, a segment of the populace fell into debt or lost their lands. Political actors, intent on maintaining or expanding their power, tore each other apart in the Senate and in the popular assemblies. Social tensions intensified, fueled by quarrels between the optimates, attached to the Senate's traditional authority, and the populares, advocates of land redistribution or broader popular participation in public life. In the streets of the capital, there was constant bustle. Victorious generals celebrated triumphs one after another, captivating the crowd, dazzled by the sight of booty brought back from distant lands, chained prisoners, and the grandeur of the military parade. New colonnades adorned one of the forums, erected to honor a high magistrate. Religious processions with cymbals and flutes punctuated the calendar, while in taverns and markets, people exchanged the latest rumors about Senate decisions, the next agrarian law, or the adoption of a new military reform. There was talk that veterans, after years spent fighting for Rome's glory, did not always receive the recognition they had hoped for upon their return. Some even became prey to cunning politicians, promising them land distributions, hoping to secure their support during elections. This hustle and bustle also reflected a deeper malaise because the Republican structure struggled to maintain balance between the old landed aristocracy and the rising forces of the urban plebs. The Republic's institutions, forged at a time when Rome was just another city-state, were now confronted with a power that controlled an empire. Laws passed under pressure from the tribunes of the plebs could clash with the vetoes of conservative magistrates. Political alliances were made and broken in the secrecy of backrooms, or sealed through strategic marriages. Rivalries sometimes drove the most powerful families to rise against one another. As for the people, they wavered between admiration and distrust of their leaders, captivated by reform promises, but often betrayed by partisan self-interest. It was in this boiling context, at the turn of the 1st century before Christ, that a child was born who would shake the foundations of Roman history. The battles against the Cimbri and the Teutons, the triumphs of Marius, the rise of Sulla, the lightning enrichment of certain factions, all contributed to accentuating internal fractures. These upheavals already foreshadowed bloody clashes and temporary dictatorships. Citizens wondered to whom the legion's loyalty would belong, to the Senate, guardian of tradition, or to a charismatic general promising booty and fertile lands. In the cramped alleyways of the Suburra, or the teeming Forum, the optimism of a conquering Rome went hand in hand with the fear of a civil war that could erupt at any moment. It was here, amid these contradictions, that the story of Gaius Julius Caesar, future Julius Caesar, began to take shape. His name, now emblematic of absolute power, then referred only to a patrician branch, certainly respectable, but whose former glory had somewhat faded. No one suspected that in a few decades, this unborn child would lead fearsome legions, reshape the Republic's institutions, and project Rome toward ambitions never before matched. The family from which Julius Caesar sprang, the gens Julia, occupied a special place in the Roman landscape at the end of the Republic. Its members claimed a prestigious, legendary lineage. They asserted descent from Iulus, son of Aeneas, the Trojan hero himself, a son of the goddess Venus. This claim gave their line an almost divine radiance. In Rome, such half-historical, half-mythological stories were not rare, but the Julia family took particular pride in theirs. Despite this aura, by the dawn of the 1st century before Christ, the Julii were no longer among the most powerful patricians. Julii referred to all the men of the family, while Julia denoted either a woman of the lineage or the family as a whole. They still held aristocratic status, which allowed them to sit in the Senate and run for magistracies, while preserving through their name the memory of illustrious ancestors. A few well-negotiated alliances in previous generations maintained the family's social prestige, even if they sometimes lacked the financial resources to compete with the great fortunes of the day. Thus, Caesar's birth took place in a family context where past glory coexisted with the need to regain influence. Gaius Julius Caesar, the father of the future conqueror, never reached the highest offices of the state, but remained a respected senator. His ambition fed on the conviction that the gens Julia must reclaim the splendor due to it. Historians commonly date Julius Caesar's birth to 100 before Christ, although some propose the year 102. He grew up in a neighborhood near the Forum, where political and social life was interwoven with the sounds of markets, speeches, and religious processions. His childhood was marked by the rigor of patrician education. In Rome, one first learned to read and write, then studied Greek culture, essential for any aristocrat aspiring to high office. Greek tutors, often educated slaves or freedmen, taught the young Caesar the art of rhetoric and persuasion. This mastery of speech would prove critical to his political rise. But Roman education was not limited to grammar lessons and the Greek language. Learning about politics, managing family affairs, and performing religious rites was just as important. From an early age, Caesar showed a keen interest in the heroes of antiquity, especially Alexander the Great. Aurelia, Caesar's mother, played a decisive role in his upbringing. Ancient accounts portray her as a wise woman with sound judgment, who closely supervised her son's education. In patrician families, the father usually introduced the child to public affairs, but in the Julii family, the maternal figure was crucial, particularly after Caesar's father died prematurely. Gaius Julius Caesar succumbed to a sudden seizure while he was putting on his sandals, leaving his son only about 15 years old. His mother's support shaped the young boy's political awareness, preparing him to understand the game of alliances and the importance of respecting traditions, while instilling in him the idea that one must sometimes dare to break conventions in order to rise. Caesar's childhood unfolded in a Rome in full turmoil. Two major factions vied for power: the populares, who sought the support of the lower classes and soldiers to push through agrarian or social reforms, and the optimates, proponents of senatorial conservatism. In this climate, Caesar's uncle by marriage, Gaius Marius, stood out as a leading figure of the populares. Marius, consul multiple times, reformed the army by allowing the poorest citizens to enlist, thereby making soldiers strongly attached to their generals. Opposite him, the general Sulla, supported by the optimates, fiercely resisted this rise of strongmen who, in his view, threatened the Senate's authority. The struggles between Marius and Sulla soon degenerated into armed confrontations, upsetting Roman public life and sowing terror in the city. Caesar, still a teenager, witnessed this gradual shift toward nearly unbridled political violence. Proscriptions, lists of citizens to be eliminated, were no longer taboo in Rome. Those linked to Marius, such as the Julia family, knew they were in danger. In this context, the young Caesar learned early the need to forge strong alliances and remain vigilant. Every move, every speech, every show of support for a magistrate could have dire consequences. This atmosphere of suspicion and mistrust shaped his youth and would forge his diplomatic sense, his taste for shrewd maneuvering, and a blend of caution and audacity. Several legends surround Caesar's birth. One of the most widespread claims he was born by cesarean section, an operation said to bear his name. Historians remain skeptical, as such a procedure on a living woman was very rare at the time and often fatal. It is more likely that this story was a later invention, intended to magnify the character or feed a pun on his nomen, Caesar. Another lesser-known tale highlights the importance of Caesar's mother, Aurelia. Some ancient writers emphasize that she effectively managed domestic affairs, protected the family's interests, and closely monitored her son's political development. In some accounts, when he was still a teenager, she was the one who warned him about the intrigues of certain Sulla supporters, or encouraged him to seek Marius's backing for his first ambitions. It is also said that the genes Julia performed a series of specific religious rites, likely linked to their purported divine ancestry. There may have been small altars dedicated to Venus Genetrix, the mother goddess of their lineage, in the family home. Caesar would later use this lineage to justify building temples in honor of the goddess, thereby strengthening his own prestige. Finally, stories abound that as a child, Caesar showed great talent for conversation, not hesitating to question adults about their political motives or the meaning of certain traditions. This curious mind, combined with Roman discipline, gradually prepared him for the oratory combat practiced in the Forum. Long before becoming a great military leader, the future conqueror was above all a formidable tribune of the plebs, knowing how to wield words to stir the crowd. In 82, before Christ, when Sulla seized power and imposed his dictatorship in Rome, Julius Caesar was still just a young patrician with an uncertain future. At that time, Sulla stood as the absolute leader of the optimates and launched a wave of proscriptions against anyone who had supported or was too closely associated with, the Marian camp. Caesar, barely 18, fell under the dictator's scrutiny. His crime? His family connections. He was married to Cornelia, the daughter of Cinna, a close ally of Marius. Sulla ordered him to repudiate her. But despite the danger, despite the looming threat, Caesar refused. This defiance already revealed his character. He was willing to risk his life for his convictions. Opposing the dictator so openly was perilous. Sulla, aware of Caesar's potential, viewed him as a future threat. Ancient sources report that, to avoid retribution, Caesar had to flee Rome and live in hiding for some time. During those uncertain months, he likely benefited from discreet support within his family or from old friends of his father, enabling him to evade Sulla's henchmen. Eventually, he obtained clemency from the dictator, thanks to pressure from influential figures, sometimes said to include the Vestal Virgins or certain powerful aristocrats. Sulla is said to have then uttered a famous warning: "Beware, in this young man there are many Mariuses." With this terse remark, he acknowledged Caesar's temperament and ambition, foreseeing that this would-be adversary could one day threaten the fragile balance of the Republic. For Caesar, this period of persecution was a lesson in duplicity and sudden power shifts. He grasped that one must never depend exclusively on a single man's favor, but rather weave a lasting network of support. Moreover, this narrow escape strengthened his resolve and his sense that he was destined for greatness, akin to the Alexander the Great he had admired since adolescence. Once Sulla's threats subsided, Caesar sought to pursue a public career that would showcase his talents. His first significant post was that of military tribune. In this capacity, he left for Asia, then partially under Roman control, to serve on various military fronts. This experience went beyond mere theoretical learning and plunged the young patrician into the realities of troop command, logistics, and military diplomacy. The campaigns in Asia, sometimes directed against pirates or small rebellious kingdoms, did not match the scale of the wars he would later wage in Gaul. However, it was there that Caesar developed his organizational sense and ability to motivate men. He also earned a reputation for fairness and firmness among his subordinates, laying the groundwork for the loyalty he would one day inspire in his legionaries. In the Roman army, officers who both protect their soldiers and reward them with booty and recognition quickly gain immense prestige. Caesar soon realized that the fate of many battles often hinged on the personal bond between a general and his men. At the end of his service in Asia, Caesar returned to Rome with enough military experience to run for his first magistracies. After holding minor offices, he was elected questor in 69 before Christ, a position that took him to further Spain, Hispania Ulterior. This was a turning point in his career. Being a questor gave him the chance to manage finances and administer a province, while forging new connections with local elites. The Iberian Peninsula, undergoing deep Romanization, proved to be a promising field for ambition. A significant episode occurred during this stay in Hispania. Faced with the statue of Alexander the Great, Caesar realized how far he still had to go to match the glory the Macedonian had achieved at the same age. By age 33, Alexander had conquered an empire stretching from Greece to the edge of India. Caesar, then over 30, had only some minor offices and a few oratory successes to his name. Sources claim he felt shame and wept over how meager his achievements seemed in comparison. But in Caesar, ambition always outweighed resignation. This realization was not a break, but a spur. He swore then to inscribe his name in history, whatever the cost. In his interactions with the local administration, he demonstrated diplomatic skill, earning respect from various Spanish cities. He also began to see how powerful fiscal policy could be. By redistributing funds fairly or intervening in disputes, he built significant local popularity. When he returned from this questorship, Caesar was already perceived as a gifted orator and a generous man, always ready to champion popular causes. Conservative circles in the Senate viewed his rise with suspicion, aware that a charismatic patrician with popular backing could become dangerous. Memories of Sulla's great purges were still fresh, and many had not forgotten how brutally the former dictator had crushed populist opponents. Since Sulla's death some 9 years earlier, the laws he had passed to maintain absolute senatorial authority had gradually been weakened. A new generation of bolder politicians was emerging, and Caesar was among them. Back in the capital, Caesar put into practice what he had observed and learned. To climb the political ladder in Rome, one had to attract public attention, win admiration, and negotiate advantageous alliances. He therefore organized games and spectacles, often financed by himself or through loans from wealthy friends or patrons who stood to benefit. These festivities, ranging from gladiatorial combats to chariot races, drew huge crowds. Ordinary Romans, fond of entertainment, applauded the young contender's initiatives. Meanwhile, Caesar built a network of support through marriage alliances that connected him to various influential families. He had married Cornelia, Cinna's daughter, whom he had bravely refused to repudiate despite Sulla's threats. After her death in 69 before Christ, he entered other marriages, Pompeia in 67 before Christ, then Calpurnia in 59 before Christ. But in Rome, marriage was never just a matter of sentiment. Beyond personal affection, these unions served as political alliances, providing entry into key circles of power. In a Rome where political advancement often depended on patron-client relationships and kinship, strategic marriages were among the most powerful levers of social promotion. The populace began to recognize Caesar's name, not only for his legendary origins. He still claimed descent from Venus through Julius and Aeneas, but also for his public stances. He positioned himself as a defender of the plebs, inheriting Marius's legacy in his own way, but avoiding outright conflict with the conservatives. This stance earned him support and allowed him to seek further public offices. His presence in the forum was increasingly noted. He was reported to speak with persuasive eloquence, moving popular assemblies or unsettling older speakers. The episode of Caesar's kidnapping by Cilician pirates in 75 before Christ was a key moment in his early military and political career. At just 25 years old, while traveling to Asia Minor, he was captured by these pirates, who demanded 20 talents of silver for his release. Far from panicking, Caesar showed disconcerting calm. He mocked the sum demanded, finding it far too low for someone of his stature. The pirates, incredulous, ended up indulging his whim and asked for 50 talents, a huge amount, which Caesar promised to pay without difficulty. During his captivity, the future conqueror displayed an almost detached attitude, even demanding silence from his captors when he wanted to sleep or write. He spent nearly 40 days among them, but never in the posture of a victim. Ancient sources say he joked with them, going so far as to promise he would have them crucified once free. They laughed, thinking him an overly self-important noble, but they did not realize he never joked about his dignity. After the ransom was paid and he was freed, he gathered an allied fleet within less than a month, hunted down the pirates, and captured them. The sentence: exactly what he had promised. They were all crucified, though in a final gesture of mercy, he had their throats cut first, sparing them a prolonged agony. This was not just vengeance, it was a statement to Rome and to anyone who might threaten his authority. Whether embellished or not, this episode greatly shaped Caesar's public image, a man of sang-froid, with biting wit even in the face of danger, and above all, a leader who never forgave an insult. Thanks to this bold move, Caesar enhanced his standing in Roman society, where the scourge of piracy was still a collective trauma. Rome still remembered maritime raids that had reached the Italian coasts only a few decades earlier. In one swift act, Caesar proved he was more than just a young orator or an ambitious upstart. He was a man of action. From then on, his career soared. He delivered speeches in the Forum, won new supporters, and climbed the rungs of power at a rapid pace. Still, his true dreams of military glory were only beginning to stir. Soon, he would not be content with minor commands. Rome alone would not satisfy him. Soon, he would aspire to lead legions across Europe, to enter history not by words alone, but by conquest. Far from a setback, his kidnapping only cemented his rising legend. Caesar did not forgive. Caesar did not forget. Already, beneath his patrician refinement, one could sense the iron grip of a leader who never backed down. In the early 60s before Christ, Julius Caesar aspired to climb the rungs of Roman power. In a republic where political influence partially depended on military prestige and wealth, two figures stood out clearly. Pompey Magnus enjoyed exceptional fame from his conquests in the East between 67 and 62 before Christ, from which he had brought back immense riches and secured new revenues for the Republic. Crassus was already known for being the richest man in Rome, having built his fortune by buying up confiscated properties at rock-bottom prices under Sulla and multiplying lucrative investments in real estate and money lending. Facing these two giants, the Senate remained divided. Certain conservative senators, the Optimates, feared the rise of generals who were too popular, while others, more attentive to popular demands, were open to supporting ambitious men who promised land distribution or agrarian reforms. In this context, Caesar, though growing in renown, still lacked the stature to impose his will alone. He noticed that Pompey and Crassus, despite their power, encountered hostility from a Senate alarmed by these two men's accumulation of wealth and the admiration of the plebs. Pompey wanted to have his actions in the East officially recognized and obtain land grants to reward his veterans, crucial to maintaining their loyalty. Crassus wished to pass laws favoring his financial interests and strengthen his economic clout. Caesar saw an opportunity to negotiate an alliance that would benefit everyone. In the summer of 60 before Christ, he discreetly proposed a private agreement, later known as the First Triumvirate, though it was not an official magistracy. To cement this agreement, Caesar, who became consul in 59 before Christ, sealed a marriage between his daughter Julia and Pompey. This family tie solidified mutual confidence. The three allies agreed on shared objectives. Pompey received Caesar's legislative support to ratify his reorganization of the eastern provinces and secure land for his veterans, vital for retaining their loyalty. Crassus, for his part, ensured the adoption of measures serving his vast financial interests, notably in the east, where he aimed to further expand his fortune. As for Caesar, he gained the backing of Pompey and Crassus to be appointed governor of Gaul after his consulship. He dreamed of conducting major military campaigns there, amassing wealth and renown on par with Pompey, and shoring up his popularity among both the plebs and the soldiers. The early years of the triumvirate allowed each member to advance his projects. Caesar departed for Gaul, where he won victory after victory, starting in 58 before Christ, accumulating spoils and prestige. Pompey, remaining in Rome, managed land distributions for his former legionaries and oversaw the city's affairs. Crassus devoted himself to business and soon hoped to prove his military prowess through a large-scale expedition in the east. But their cooperation quickly showed its limits. By 56, before Christ, divisions were apparent. Pompey, still allied with Caesar, grew uneasy at the speed with which Caesar extended his influence. Meetings like the famous conference at Lucca in 56 sought to redefine the terms of their agreement and reaffirm the group's solidarity. The sudden death of Julia in 54. Before Christ dealt a severe blow to the alliance's stability. With it vanished the marital link uniting Pompey to Caesar's family. Tensions then sharpened, and the Roman elite multiplied intrigues to set Pompey against Caesar. Meanwhile, Crassus, aiming to match Pompey's military glory and reinforce his grip on the east, launched a campaign against the Parthians. He hoped to achieve a resounding success, secure territories to administer, and reap considerable profits. But the Battle of Carrhae in 53, before Christ, proved disastrous. Crassus was killed, and several Roman legions were wiped out. Crassus's death effectively ended the triumvirate. Without the three-way balance, Pompey and Caesar's ambitions clashed directly. Freed from family ties after Julia's death, Pompey grew closer to the conservative Senate to thwart his now too powerful ally. Caesar, for his part, continued his conquests in Gaul while closely watching events in Rome. The path to civil war was now open. The triumvirate, devised to circumvent senatorial rigidity, proved incapable of resisting rival ambitions and the trials of fate. A few anecdotes highlight the complexity of this pact. It is said that Julia, who was particularly young, was strongly attached to Pompey and often played diplomat when Caesar and Pompey disagreed over policies. Her death, leaving no heir to solidify that lineage, created an irreparable rift between Caesar and Pompey. Meanwhile, some rumors claimed that Crassus and Caesar had discussed carving up the east if they triumphed over the Parthians, or planned new funding for Caesar's future wars. But the defeat at Carrhae rendered such schemes void and shattered the illusion of a balanced trio. In the end, the first triumvirate only further exposed the weakness of a republic beset by individual ambitions. Even while benefiting its three signatories, it propelled the city toward deep divisions. The Senate, powerless against an informal but strikingly effective alliance, found itself subject to the will of generals and financiers of great renown. In 58, before Christ, Julius Caesar, already celebrated for a remarkable consulship in 59, was assigned the governance of Cisalpine and Transalpine Gaul, as well as Illyria. Behind this appointment lay a clear ambition to gain military glory on par with generals like Pompey. The horizon of what was then called long-haired Gaul offered him a vast theater of operations. The region was inhabited by a multitude of often rival tribes, and until then, Rome had mostly limited itself to securing its southern border without fully subduing the territory. Moreover, Germanic peoples threatened to cross the Rhine, and the migrations of various tribes, including the Helvetii, alarmed the Republic. These concerns fueled Caesar's rhetoric, presenting him as Rome's defender against an external threat, while giving him the perfect opportunity to forge his own legend. In the spring of 58, before Christ, Caesar's first major confrontation was with the Helvetii. Migrating from their Alpine territories westward, they sought to cross Transalpine Gaul, worrying certain Gallic tribes allied with Rome. Claiming to protect these allies, Caesar intervened. The decisive battle took place near Bibracte, the wealthy Aedui capital in eastern Gaul. Despite their bravery, the Helvetii were heavily defeated and forced to return to their lands, now under Roman supervision. This victory immediately established Caesar as a formidable general, and he used it to justify his permanent presence in Gaul, presenting himself as the region's guardian of stability. In the wake of this success, Caesar clashed with another adversary, Ariovistus, a Germanic warlord already settled west of the Rhine. The tribes of eastern Gaul, uneasy about his growing domination, called on Rome for help. Caesar answered that call and, after a short campaign, defeated Ariovistus in a pivotal battle in 58 before Christ, forcing the Germans to cross back over the Rhine. With this new victory, Caesar reinforced his image as Gaul's protector against what he termed the barbarian invasion, all in the name of Rome. In the following years, he successively battled various Gallic and Belgic peoples. The Belgae, considered the most formidable warriors in Gaul, forced him to adopt complex maneuvers. He had fortifications built and played local alliances so he wouldn't have to face all the tribes united. In 56, before Christ, he moved against the Veneti, masters of maritime navigation on the Atlantic coast, whom he defeated by adapting a Roman fleet to the local coastal conditions. Pacification continued northward and westward, consolidating a vast territory under Roman control, although Caesar often preferred to divide tribes against each other rather than establish a direct, uniform administration. As Rome extended its hold over Gaul, a resistance movement coalesced around a charismatic Arvernian leader, Vercingetorix. Born to a noble family, he united tribes that were sometimes enemies under a single goal: permanently driving out the Roman occupier. His skill lay in a scorched earth strategy meant to deprive Caesar of supplies and spoils. It involved destroying crops and emptying cities before the Roman legions arrived, while conducting mobile guerrilla operations. Many Gallic cities hesitated in the face of such drastic measures, but Vercingetorix managed to galvanize a portion of the population, framing their collective freedom as the ultimate stake. The Siege of Alesia in 52. Before Christ was the climax of the struggle between Caesar's forces and the federated Gauls. Vercingetorix took refuge on an oppidum perched on a plateau, convinced that Gallic reinforcements would eventually break the Roman encirclement. Caesar, meanwhile, built a double line of fortifications, one facing inward around Alesia and another facing outward to hold off the anticipated Gallic relief forces. After a series of desperate assaults, Vercingetorix surrendered, hoping to spare his people from massacre. The surrender of the Arvernian leader remains the most striking image of the Gallic Wars and marked the failure of the rebellion. To conquer a territory as vast and fragmented as Gaul, Caesar relied on a range of astute strategies. He cleverly exploited tribal rivalries. For instance, he formed multiple alliances with certain Gallic cities, such as the Aedui, thus feeding the jealousy of other clans like the Sequani, who feared being cut out of power sharing. By playing on internal disputes, he alternately presented himself as an arbiter or a protector, dividing to conquer. His military and logistical innovations also made a difference. One memorable episode was his construction of a bridge over the Rhine in just 10 days. Caesar didn't just station his troops on the riverbank. He sought to demonstrate Rome's engineering superiority and send a clear message to the Germanic tribes. This massive bridge, solidly secured, still fascinates historians for its logistical and architectural prowess. After crossing it for a swift incursion into German territory, Caesar demolished the structure as if to affirm his total control over the frontier. Contrary to the image of a relentlessly ruthless conqueror, several accounts mention Caesar's clemency towards certain Gallic tribes. When they surrendered quickly, he refrained from plundering and kept local power structures in place, a Roman policy of calculated mercy. Moreover, he occasionally settled local conflicts or supported a friendly leader in need. Under the guise of kindness, he was primarily securing new loyal clients, turning Gallic chiefs into devoted political allies. Nor should we forget the impact of the commentaries on the Gallic War, written by Caesar himself. In these accounts, he presented his campaigns in a favorable light, justifying each offensive as necessary to protect Rome or its allies. His style, noted for its clarity and concision, helped shape his legend, turning his conquests into epic narratives. These works were not simple military reports. They were finely tuned propaganda, aimed at winning over Rome's political class and common people, while showcasing the literary talent of their author. By the end of these campaigns, Caesar's achievements were colossal. Not only did he significantly expand Rome's sphere of influence in Gaul, securing access to new resources such as grain, slaves, metals, and more, but he also solidified his reputation among the legions. The soldiers were devoted to him because he distributed the spoils fairly and showed consistent care for their welfare, handing out rewards and promotions based on merit. This loyalty would soon be crucial when the time came to oppose the Senate's decisions and the rival faction led by Pompey. He also earned immense prestige from the triumphs granted to him by the Roman people. Upon returning to Rome, Caesar's triumphant processions laden with Gallic spoils and prisoners made a powerful impression on the capital. Many senators, already suspicious, saw a new danger: a general adored by the populace, enriched by his conquests, commanding seasoned troops, and ready to impose his political will. They feared that Caesar aimed to overturn Rome's traditional republican institutions. Lastly, the financial aspect should not be overlooked. The Gallic Wars, fought mainly between 58 and 51, before Christ, yielded a massive influx of tributes, slaves, and loot. Caesar bolstered his client networks in Rome by redistributing part of these riches. He could also pay off his own debts, incurred to fund his electoral campaigns and his largesse toward the plebs. In 53, before Christ, the sudden death of Crassus at the Battle of Carrhae in the east shook the fragile political balance of the Roman Republic. Crassus, the third pillar of the first triumvirate, had acted as a counterweight between Caesar and Pompey. Without him, the alliance teetered. In Pompey's eyes, Caesar's growing power in Gaul now became much more worrisome. Moreover, Julia's death a short time before had removed the marital bond linking the two men. With it, their familial proximity vanished, and suspicion reemerged. This rupture came just as Caesar, triumphant in Gaul, enjoyed enormous popularity among the plebs in the army. Rome was regularly hearing of his glorious campaigns, his dazzling victories, and the wealth his legions sent home. The people saw him as a general close to his men, generous and resolute. Pompey, once the uncontested master of the Roman scene, feared being overshadowed. Long-contained tensions crystallized around a central question: who would embody supreme power in Rome? Aware of Caesar's growing might, the Senate, dominated by the Optimates, sought to remove him as soon as possible. Under the influence of powerful figures like Cato or Bibulus, a motion demanded that Caesar relinquish his command as soon as his Gallic tenure ended. They feared seeing him return to Italy at the head of a conquering army, buoyed by his popularity. The senators hoped to force him to come back as a mere citizen, without legions, exposed to the legal prosecutions awaiting him, in particular for having exceeded his authority during his consulship. Pompey, swayed by the Senate's flattery and pressure, eventually sided with them. He was even granted additional offices and the status of protector of the Republic, enhancing his stature among those wary of an authoritarian drift. Despite repeated messages urging him to disband his troops before entering Italy, Caesar found no acceptable compromise. He knew too well that returning without his legions would mean losing any negotiating power and likely facing a trial that would leave him defenseless. Early in 49, before Christ, tension reached a breaking point. The Senate ordered Caesar to disband his army or be declared an enemy of the Republic. Pompey was given full powers to defend the city. Caesar, then stationed in Cisalpine Gaul, faced a decisive choice: either comply, returning to Rome as an ordinary citizen and sacrificing his influence and military protection, or cross the Italian border in arms, committing an act of rebellion punishable by the harshest measures. The Rubicon marked the boundary between Cisalpine Gaul and Italy proper. Tradition holds that Caesar hesitated for hours, fully aware that any decision would be irrevocable. Ultimately, he advanced to the banks of the Rubicon at the head of a small cohort and uttered the now famous words, "Alea jacta est," the die is cast. By crossing the river, he violated Roman law, which forbade bringing troops into Italy without senatorial authorization. The act was effectively a declaration of war on the Republic. The symbolic weight of this gesture went far beyond its military import. The Rubicon, a modest waterway, became for posterity the uncrossable red line. By crossing it, Caesar showed that he intended to assert his rights and legitimacy by force, if necessary. It was more than a dramatic flourish. It was the official start of a civil conflict set to reshape Rome completely. Reaction was swift. The Senate, in a panic, granted Pompey sweeping prerogatives. He was ordered to gather troops in Italy and halt Caesar's advance. Yet, contrary to expectations, many cities on the peninsula, weary of senatorial control, opened their gates to Caesar. He was cheered in Ariminum, modern Rimini, and elsewhere, where people saw in him either the hope of political renewal or simply the victorious conqueror of Gaul, charismatic and close to the people. Confronted by this popular tide, Pompey had no time to organize Italy's defense. His conscription efforts proceeded slowly, and enthusiasm among recruits was lukewarm. He quickly chose to leave the city, accompanied by several influential senators, heading for Brundisium, modern Brindisi in southern Italy, then sailing for Greece. With this move, Pompey aimed to avoid a direct clash with Caesar on the peninsula, hoping instead to raise a powerful army in the east. Handing Rome over to Caesar without a fight was a severe psychological blow. The capital fell into the hands of the rebel proconsul with scarcely any bloodshed. For Caesar, it was a major apparent victory. He now controlled the city, but he still had to face Pompey and his supporters, who were determined to fight on. Pompey's flight, along with that of the Senate, suggested a protracted war, for the main repository of official legitimacy had now left Italy. Although there had been no battle in Rome itself, the conflict was fully engaged, likely to stretch over months or even years of successive clashes. Regarding the famous phrase, alea jacta est, ancient authors disagree about the exact moment Caesar spoke it and its precise wording. Some attribute it to Suetonius, others to Plutarch. It's possible that posterity refined it for theatrical effect. A variation also circulates, jacta alea est, reversing the subject and verb. Either way, the meaning is the same. The die is cast, signifying the irreversibility of the choice. Roman popular culture, steeped in omens, brims with stories about the night before crossing the Rubicon. Some say a flute player or mysterious musician encouraged Caesar. Others mention a prophetic dream in which the general crossed a river of blood. Nothing is historically certain, but such tales reflect the fascination surrounding this critical moment. Whispers also suggest he may have spoken Greek, anaryptho kubos, since Caesar was fluent in that language. Using Greek, the language of high culture, would heighten the scene's solemnity. When civil war erupted, Caesar advanced rapidly through Italy, forcing Pompey and part of the Senate to flee east. After a few preliminary skirmishes, the two sides faced off in 48 before Christ in Thessaly, near the plain of Pharsalus. Although Pompey had considerable resources and strong senatorial backing and fielded an army larger than Caesar's, he also enjoyed naval superiority, controlling some Mediterranean supply routes. Caesar, despite this apparent disadvantage, trusted the discipline of his legions, hardened by years of campaigning in Gaul, to offset his numerical inferiority. Pompey's strategy was to exhaust Caesar's forces, which struggled to secure provisions in hostile territory. He hoped to compel Caesar to fight under unfavorable circumstances, exploiting his advantage in cavalry. Caesar, on the other hand, knew he had to force a decisive battle before shortages or demoralization took hold among his men. A cohort was a military unit of the Roman army, numbering about 480 to 600 soldiers. Each legion was divided into 10 cohorts, each cohort composed of several centuries. A century, despite its name, generally included about 80 men, led by a centurion, an experienced officer responsible for leading his men in combat. On the morning of the battle, Caesar deployed his legions in a dense formation, placing 6 cohorts in reserve on his right flank, where Pompey massed a large cavalry contingent. This maneuver proved crucial. When the Pompeian cavalry charged, it found itself pinched by these unexpected reserve troops. Surprised by the stout resistance on Caesar's right, Pompey's cavalry withdrew, triggering panic in their ranks. Pompey, unsettled by the sudden shift in battle, couldn't restore order. Caesar's legions, seizing the opening, broke through the enemy lines. Soon, Pompey's men fled in confusion. Confronted with the rout, Pompey chose to flee, leaving the battlefield and heading to Egypt, hoping to find a safe haven and possible financial backing to rebuild an army. Versailles was a major turning point. While Pompey went into exile, Caesar's military reputation soared. For many Romans, this victory demonstrated that he was not only the great conqueror of Gaul, but also a leader capable of defeating a general long deemed invincible. Caesar, however, did not immediately triumph. He knew Pompey remained influential and had gone to seek new support. The civil war was far from over, but the balance of power now tilted in Caesar's favor. Upon arriving in Egypt, Pompey hoped to win the backing of the young King Ptolemy XIII, whose kingdom, nominally independent, actually depended heavily on Rome to maintain its throne. But Ptolemy XIII's advisors, fearing Caesar's wrath, decided to assassinate Pompey and present his head to Caesar as a gift. When Caesar landed in Alexandria in September 48th, before Christ, he was greeted by this grim offering. Far from rejoicing, he was shocked and appalled. Despite their feud, Pompey was still a great Roman, and Caesar may have intended to capture him alive or use him as leverage to broker some form of reconciliation. The intrigues of the Ptolemaic court then drew Caesar into another conflict. Encouraged by his advisors, Ptolemy XIII worried about Caesar's presence and the Roman troops stationed in Alexandria. Moreover, Ptolemy's half-sister, Cleopatra, also claimed the throne. Caesar, forced into the role of arbiter in this family quarrel, sided with Cleopatra, believing she would prove more cooperative toward Rome. Hostilities broke out in the city. The siege of Alexandria had begun. Outnumbered, Caesar was holed up in the royal palace and its surroundings with a handful of legionaries and limited supplies. Diplomacy played a significant role. He managed to get reinforcements from Asia Minor, while the Egyptians, split between Ptolemy XIII's supporters and Cleopatra's, struggled to mount a unified offensive. Ultimately, Ptolemy XIII was defeated and likely drowned in the Nile during a naval engagement. Cleopatra was restored to the throne under Caesar's protection. During his stay in Alexandria, Caesar began his famous liaison with Cleopatra. He spent the winter of 47 before Christ in Egypt, sailing along the Nile with the Queen, in a relationship that was both political and romantic. A son, Caesarion, was born from this union, and Cleopatra would always assert his paternity. Roman propaganda didn't emphasize this foreign connection too much, but in certain conservative circles in Rome, the link with Egypt raised eyebrows and sparked gossip. After Alexandria, Caesar had to confront the remaining Pompeian loyalists scattered across the east. One of the most famous episodes of this phase of the Civil War was his swift victory at Zela in 47 before Christ against King Pharnaces II, son of Mithridates. This foe, hoping to exploit the distraction caused by the Egyptian crisis, attempted to shrug off Roman influence. Caesar, responding with characteristic speed, crushed him in a lightning campaign. After his triumph, he is said to have sent a concise message to Rome, Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered, underscoring how effortlessly he had prevailed. Yet the resistance did not end in the east. a hard core of Pompeian senators had retreated to Africa in what is now Tunisia, home to the powerful Roman province of Africa Proconsularis. Caesar had to launch another campaign to face them. The Battle of Thapsus in 46. Before Christ saw Caesar pitted against the combined forces of Cato the Younger and Metellus Scipio, two unwavering optimates. Caesar's tactical advantage and the superior training of his troops led once again to victory. Many Pompeian leaders chose suicide over capture, Cato famously taking his own life in Utica, rather than submit to Caesar's mercy. By 45, before Christ, fighting shifted to Hispania, where Pompey's sons, Gnaeus and Sextus, rallied local peoples and veteran loyalists. The Battle of Munda in southern Spain finally put an end to this long conflict. The Pompeian resistance was crushed, although Sextus Pompey escaped and would remain a thorn in Rome's side for several more years. Still, after Munda, Caesar could consider himself the undisputed victor of the Civil War. Upon returning to Rome, Caesar staged several triumphs, grand ceremonies in which he displayed his spoils, prisoners, and the emblems of his victories. Romans saw exotic captives, treasures, and heard speeches celebrating the victor's clemency, highlighting how many lives he had spared. In truth, the war had been bloody, but Caesar's propaganda skillfully spotlighted the mercy granted to some famous foes or to the population of conquered cities. These triumphs secured his political dominance. In the aftermath of the battles, Caesar undertook sweeping reforms, from granting land to veterans to incorporating more provincials into the Senate or reorganizing the Republic's administration. Many senators obeyed his will, stunned by his popularity or fearful of ostracism. Yet behind the scenes, dissent simmered among those who believed that this concentration of power threatened the Republic's institutions. Adorned with victories, Caesar seemed determined to refashion Rome according to his vision, at the risk of abandoning the city's centuries-old traditions. Progressive pacification of the empire opened the way for a series of building projects and legislative proposals aimed at modernizing Rome. Caesar acted more like a head of state than a general. He championed initiatives, reformed the calendar, launched public building works, and planned new conquests in the east against the Parthians. To his supporters, he was an energetic, enlightened leader, able to save the Republic from chaos. To his opponents, he was a budding tyrant. Cleopatra's presence in this saga stirred intense controversy. Some claim Caesar installed her in a villa near the Tiber during her stay in Rome around 46 to 45, before Christ, scandalizing the Senate. The outrage centered on the notion of a foreign queen influencing Roman politics. Rumors spread that Caesar might formally marry her or that he was planning to build a temple in her honor. Nothing is confirmed, but Cleopatra's presence in the capital fueled gossip and satirical commentary. Caesar's relationship with the people also experienced ups and downs. Although he enjoyed huge military prestige, not everyone supported his reforms. When he received honors such as statues of himself in the city or the right to wear a diadem on certain occasions, some Romans wondered if he aspired to kingship. Having silenced most of his opponents by military means only fueled suspicions that he might harbor monarchical ambitions. Even so, the end of the Civil War coincided with a period of intense activity in Rome. Former Pompeians who survived, if not dead or exiled, occasionally received Caesar's clemency. He recognized that public forgiveness could help stabilize the city and bolster his image as a magnanimous leader. Behind this conciliatory mask, however, he concentrated real power in his own hands, prompting many senators to acquiesce to his authority. Following his successive victories in the Civil War, Julius Caesar returned to Rome as its uncontested ruler. It was now 46 before Christ, and the Republic, exhausted by internal strife, lay under the influence of a single man. Starting in 44 before Christ, he was proclaimed dictator for life. In Roman tradition, dictatorship was an extraordinary office, typically limited to 6 months during severe crises. Caesar shattered that precedent by accumulating offices while remaining consul, holding on to the proconsular governorship of Gaul and retaining the position of Pontifex Maximus, head of the Roman religion. Never before had a Roman concentrated so many essential magistracies. This extraordinary concentration of power allowed him to intervene in every area of decision-making. He presided over the Senate, commanded the army, proposed laws directly, and oversaw religious rites. Officially, the senatorial assembly continued to function, but Caesar expanded it with men loyal to him, some of them Gaulish or from other distant provinces. Conservative senators protested that this bloated Senate degraded the high assembly and eroded the privileges of old families. Others believed it an opportunity to bring in fresh talent and modernize Rome. In any case, Caesar was no longer just a magistrate. He embodied, by himself, supreme authority. Aware that his power rested on both the army and the popularity of his reforms, Caesar embarked on ambitious undertakings. In 46 before Christ, he introduced the Julian calendar, bringing an end to years of chronological confusion. Previously, the Roman calendar was based on lunar months, leading to perpetual misalignment. With the help of Egyptian astronomers, Caesar adopted a system similar to ours today: 365 days plus 1 leap day every 4 years. This measure gave his reign tangible impact on daily life and immortalized his name. Meanwhile, he enlarged the Senate, admitting new members from the western provinces or northern Italy, including some from the Romanized Gallic aristocracy. The Senate, traditionally about 600 members, rose to around 900. For Caesar, these appointments served to tighten his grip, but also demonstrated a desire to incorporate a broader range of imperial elites. In addition, he promoted agrarian laws, granting public lands, often in Campania or other parts of Italy, to veteran soldiers. He aimed to reward those who had followed him during the civil wars and fulfill the plebs' recurring demand for access to land. He also instituted measures on debt, a thorny issue in a society where lending and usury were widespread. He attempted to curb interest rates, cancel part of existing debts, and facilitate repayment by setting limits on how much creditors could claim. This policy was unpopular among wealthy lenders, but welcomed by ordinary citizens. In the peninsula's municipalities, he undertook a reorganization by establishing new local offices and redistributing civic duties more fairly. Caesar presented these efforts as giving coherence to Roman territory, arguing that rebuilding Rome and its empire required an efficient, centralized administration entirely aligned with his vision. Despite broad internal reforms, Caesar did not neglect external expansion. He was already dreaming of heading east, where Crassus had failed against the Parthians. The memory of the defeat at Carrhae in 53. Before Christ haunted him, Caesar wanted to avenge that humiliation and show that no foreign power could defy Rome with impunity. Some contemporaries believed he often compared himself to Alexander the Great, admiring the empire Alexander had built over 2 centuries earlier. For Caesar, controlling the Mediterranean world was no longer enough. He intended to push Rome's frontier to the limits of the known world, meticulously mapped by Greek scholars. He also founded new colonies, settling veterans and Roman citizens in strategic areas, notably in Gaul and the Balkans. The aim was to solidify Rome's influence in regions that had been conquered or could become contested. Although he wouldn't live to achieve all his ambitions, simply voicing his desire for a grand campaign against the Parthians revealed his drive to cast himself as the heir to antiquity's great figures, with the horizon of a universal empire. Alongside his military and political accomplishments, Caesar paid particular attention to his public image. He had coins struck bearing his own likeness, a privilege rarely granted to a living Roman. Traditionally, Republican coinage featured ancestors or deities. By doing this, Caesar openly broke that taboo, putting his face into every routine transaction. Statues in his honor proliferated in Rome and allied cities, sometimes accompanied by inscriptions calling him the father of the fatherland or the savior. His sense of communication also surfaced in grand public festivals. He financed games, banquets, and lavish gladiatorial contests, aiming to keep the populace enthralled by his rule. He portrayed himself as a benefactor on a civilizing mission. Some in his circle floated the idea that Caesar was deserving of quasi-divine status. Rumors circulated about honoring him as a living god, a man-god embodying Rome's revival. Religious institutions were not spared. As Pontifex Maximus, Caesar could direct official sacrifices, festivals, and cults, constantly reminding people of his family's supposed divine lineage back to the goddess Venus. In Rome, religion and politics were tightly interwoven. By controlling the focal point of public worship, the dictator further tightened his hold on public opinion. It is said Caesar enjoyed making jokes at court, particularly when offered extravagant religious ceremonies in his honor. At times, he feigned refusal, insisting he was no god, while allowing other rites to proceed. This dual stance demonstrated both humor and strategy. It suggested modesty, even as he accepted unprecedented honors. Many accounts also describe scenes where Caesar sharply scolded flatterers who went too far, as if to maintain strict control over how people elevated him to Rome's tutelary figure. For instance, he supposedly refused to be called king, a title Romans had loathed since the fall of their monarchy over 4 centuries earlier. Yet evidence suggests he wasn't wholly opposed to the idea of kingship. In his final year, rumors spread that he planned to declare himself king of Egypt in partnership with Cleopatra, or that he intended to return from his future eastern campaign wearing a crown. Such ambiguities stoked political tension. Many wondered what limits Caesar still observed, or if he had any left. During official celebrations, his right-hand man, Mark Antony, allegedly attempted to present him with a diadem, which Caesar publicly waved away. But the incident left lingering doubts about his true intentions. Between an official refusal and a covert acceptance, Caesar kept everyone intrigued and uneasy. Numerous aristocrats committed to republican traditions feared he was on the verge of founding a monarchy. Caesar accumulated offices, received extraordinary honors, and left open the question of whether he planned to be crowned. The fear of a return to kingship revived ancient memories. Since the ouster of Rome's last king in the 6th century before Christ, the city had clung to republican freedom. Seeing one man gather all powers and be venerated like a demigod stirred frustration and anger among the staunchest defenders of tradition. Among the general populace, though many enjoyed Caesar's generosity, there were murmurs that his ambition exceeded what the Republic could bear. The assemblies, meant to pass laws and elect magistrates, did little more than rubber stamp his decisions. The Senate, swollen by Caesar's appointments, seemed beholden to his authority. In back rooms, conspiratorial whispers abounded. There was talk that after an upcoming Eastern campaign, Caesar would return wearing a royal crown, or that he had accepted near-divine titles. Others claimed to have heard him ridicule the old constitution, as if the Republic was no more than an empty shell. The more Republican-minded senators quietly conferred, wondering if the city could still be saved from a monarchical slide. At the heart of this opposition, certain names stood out: Gaius Cassius Longinus, Decimus Brutus, Servilius Casca, and especially Marcus Junius Brutus. The latter was a special case. Having sided with Caesar after the Civil War, he benefited from Caesar's patronage and held high offices. Yet Brutus considered himself the spiritual heir of Lucius Junius Brutus, the mythical founder of the Republic, who had expelled King Tarquin the Proud over 4 centuries earlier. That ancestral myth put him in a psychological bind. He owed Caesar gratitude, but also felt bound by the republican ideals that coursed through his lineage. Cassius, meanwhile, nursed more personal grievances. A partisan of Pompey, he had seen his camp defeated and resented obeying the man he regarded as dangerously ambitious. Gradually, in secret, the idea of assassination took shape. The conspirators convinced themselves that killing Caesar was the only way to save the Republic. They held multiple clandestine meetings to pinpoint the right moment and place. The biggest unknown was the people's reaction. Caesar's popularity rendered the plot risky, as did the devotion of many legionaries who owed him their fortunes. They finally chose the Ides of March, March 15th, 44th, before Christ. They knew Caesar would go to the Curia of Pompey, a symbolic building erected by his former rival, for a Senate session. The advantage was twofold. The dictator would be unarmed, dressed in a toga without weapons, and most of his military supporters would be unable to accompany him inside. The plan was straightforward: surround him when he least expected it, then stab him repeatedly to ensure no chance of survival. On the morning of March 15th, dire omens circulated in Rome. Soothsayers advised Caesar to beware, but he was skeptical. Legend has it, his wife, Calpurnia, had a nightmare seeing him covered in blood, pleading with him not to leave their home. Caesar hesitated, but the senator Decimus Brutus reassured him, saying he should attend to avoid appearing cowardly. So he left late for the Curia, ignoring a note supposedly slipped into his hand, listing the conspirators. Once in the Senate, the session began as if nothing was amiss. Some conspirators pretended to petition Caesar about a request, with one of them, possibly Tullius Cimber, pulling on his toga to get his attention. Instantly, Servilius Casca delivered the first stab, awkwardly striking Caesar's shoulder. Caesar turned around, stunned. The others closed in, stabbing him in turn. According to some sources, he was struck with as many as 23 knife wounds. Amid the chaos, he recognized Brutus, and in a version reported by Suetonius, uttered the legendary phrase, "Tu quoque, mi fili, Brute." "You too, my son, Brutus?" He collapsed at the foot of Pompey's statue. A grim irony, given Pompey was the rival he had once defeated. The scene threw the Senate into panic. Some senators not involved fled in terror. The conspirators held their bloody daggers aloft, shouting that they had liberated Rome from tyranny. Caesar's corpse lay alone, in a pool of blood, at the feet of Pompey's statue. In a flash, Rome's history changed forever. Countless omens are said to have foretold the Ides of March. In addition to Calpurnia's dream, one soothsayer supposedly warned Caesar about this day. People spoke of strange occurrences, like unusual birds hovering over the capital or lightning striking near the field of Mars. While many details are drawn from literary tradition, they convey the heightened tension gripping the city at that moment. Other anecdotes circulated. A friend had allegedly given Caesar a secret message describing the conspiracy, including the names of the plotters, just before the session. Too rushed, Caesar never read it. He would never learn its contents, carrying the revelation of his downfall to his grave. Some claimed Brutus trembled so much as he delivered the fatal blow that another conspirator had to guide his hand. Whether real or exaggerated, these tales illustrate the symbolic power of that day when so many destinies converged. Immediately after the assassination, the conspirators expected a popular uprising in their favor, confident they had saved the Republic. They ran through the streets, brandishing their daggers and shouting, "Libertas!" Yet the people, shocked by such brutality, did not respond as they had hoped. Many Romans, including those of modest means, mourned Caesar's death, remembering his grain distributions, games, and apparent kindness toward the poor. Confusion and fear reigned. Mark Antony, a close lieutenant of Caesar's, seized the opportunity to become guardian of the late dictator's legacy. At the funeral, he delivered an incendiary speech in the Forum, displaying Caesar's wounds and condemning the conspirators as vile murderers. Stirred, the crowd rose up against them, forcing the assassins to barricade themselves or flee the capital. It was said that an impromptu fire started when Caesar's body was burned on the Forum, with everyone throwing offerings or pieces of furniture onto the pyre. In the weeks following, Rome's political future remained uncertain. Though the conspirators held senatorial titles, they struggled to impose a new order. Outraged by Caesar's murder, the people demanded justice. Mark Antony and other Caesar loyalists negotiated a nominal amnesty, hoping to avert further bloodshed, even as they prepared for retribution. When Julius Caesar fell to the conspirators' knives in 44. Before Christ, the Roman Republic did not return to the stability the assassins had envisioned. His will, revealed shortly after the Ides of March, named an unexpected heir, Octavian, his grandnephew, then barely 19. This young man, still unknown to the masses, took the name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus and inherited the bulk of Caesar's fortune. To many Romans, commoners and elites alike, he became the living embodiment of Caesar's legacy. Octavian promptly claimed moral and political authority as Caesar's successor, setting him on a collision course with Mark Antony, another of Caesar's close allies. Rather than plunge into immediate conflict, Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus formed a new, officially recognized triumvirate in 43 before Christ to jointly govern the Republic. Yet they swiftly resorted to bloody proscriptions to eliminate political enemies. One of the most notorious tragedies was the execution of Cicero, the great orator, deemed too critical of Antony and Octavian. Once they had neutralized their shared adversaries, including Brutus and Cassius at Philippi in 42 before Christ, the triumvirs turned on each other. Antony turned east and aligned with Cleopatra, while Octavian consolidated his position in the west. Lepidus, less influential, was soon pushed aside. Tensions reached a climax at the Battle of Actium in 31 before Christ, where Antony and Cleopatra's fleet was defeated by Octavian's forces. The following year, Antony and Cleopatra took their own lives, clearing the way for Octavian to dominate the Roman world. In 27 before Christ, Octavian was granted the title Augustus by the Senate. He established the Principate, effectively becoming Rome's first emperor, albeit under the pretense of preserving republican institutions. This new regime, the empire, might never have arisen in the same manner had Caesar not first initiated the concentration of powers and profound restructuring of the republic. Thereafter, as partial inheritor of Caesar's charisma, Augustus continued his uncle's work, though with greater political caution, solidifying an imperial system that would endure for centuries. Caesar's legacy extended far beyond his lifetime. He left Rome a model of personal authority, a program of administrative and social reforms, a crisp literary style, and a legend that every generation would reinterpret. His very name became a title, Caesar, adopted by Roman emperors and later echoed by German Kaisers and Russian Tsars, testifying to the symbolic force of a man who, in just a few